Welcome back to the Progressive Pastor Podcast, where we explore the intersections of justice, faith, and church. Kyle, what's up?
How's it going, JT?
Oh, you know, we're here, we're vibing.
Yeah. Welcome back to our first recording sesh post the new year.
That's right.
And we have something really exciting for episode 3 of the Progressive Pastor Podcast.
Here we go.
Now, this is a listening-only format, so we can't see what's happening here, but joining us in the recording studio today, we have the one and only,
The man,
the
myth, the legend,
white noise himself,
David
David
Stewart.
Stewart. Welcome, David.
Hey, and you guys don't know how big this is because I've already had people who want me to shut you guys down.
Whoa!
So for me to be on this is like huge. That
that
here we
that
go.
doesn't sound
So-
right.
You know who else they wanted to shut down?
Who's that?
Jesus.
That's
Oh,
true. Here we go. Boom.
There we go.
You got
So,
it.
listeners, in our last couple episodes, we've kind of previewed David, knowing he was going to be our first guest on the PPP, and we've described him in a variety of ways as just older and pretty white.
Older and wider than most people you
So,
probably ever
if you
encounter.
had to picture, you can picture like an old, like, Victorian child is how I would. Is that about right, David?
Careful. Be
apt.
careful here.
And I bring it up, David. We're a little behind. We didn't start the podcast until 24. This was a TikTok trend back in the summer
Yeah.
of what today in 2024 would scare a old Victorian child. So something like, to kind of get you on the right track here, David, like McDonald's Sprite, I think, would just send a Victorian child like straight to the crypt.
A single sour
Speaking-
Skittle.
Speaking of which, I really do have to question your all's judgment if both of you put McDonald's on your top 5 fast food.
Oh,
Wow.
Really?
wow,
For adults?
David.
I mean, that in and of itself should scare everybody.
We
who's
are
listening to this
men of the
podcast.
people,
Yeah.
David.
I don't know. Actually, he makes a good point. Are we just like embodying the machine that is corporate America for picking McDonald's? don't
I
know.
think picking any fast food
That's
kind
true,
of,
yeah.
hints toward that.
It's not a great look, but yeah. So, David, what to you, being an elder in 2024, what would scare a Victorian child
what
to
would,
you?
what would put a Victorian child into a coma
Yeah.
if they experienced it today?
Probably, aside from Kyle's golf game.
Oh!
Let's see. Honestly, some of the video. I mean, just think about
Oh,
what,
yeah.
you know. And we are talking about that in terms of, the sensory kinds of stuff for people today that sometimes is overwhelming. But can you imagine for somebody who's never
Yeah.
had sensory stuff to
Yeah.
all of a sudden
Yeah.
have the light show that some of our worship services would love to
Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah. I was thinking like tech deck skateboards.
I was thinking like Sharknado.
Ooh.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Talk
Yeah.
about guilty pleasures. Love the Sharknado franchise.
You would.
Yeah.
It seems like
Guilty
you would.
pleasure.
You seem like the type.
Yeah. Oh man. Oh, that's
yeah.
that's too good. Well, David, we want to go ahead and turn it over to you. We've kind of done you some justice, and in a positive way, I will say, of kind of introing you and who you are. But I want to turn the floor over to you. Just let our listeners know kind of a little bit about you and how you got into your call into ministry.
It really just dovetails with sort of the story, and being a storyteller, I can't help but want to weave both of those kind of together. Grew up in what a lot of folks from the outside would have saw as the perfect, 2-kid, 2-parent home with mom staying home when we were young. However, my brother and I had significant challenges in school. My brother was one of those who had an obvious speech impediment, but they also noticed about the time they were trying to deal with him that I was one of those persons who was blowing the lid off of standardized testing in math, science, some of those things, but couldn't
You should have gone to
spell worth
Princeton, apparently.
beans. No, I couldn't spell. I couldn't have been able to write a document to be able to get in.
That's true. I've edited some of his work. It's pretty
really,
shocking.
It's a
really
little
bad.
scary.
Yeah. And I joke about it, but it's real. Eventually, I did get diagnosed as anyway, I have a form of dyslexia, and it's very real. One of the worst things you can do is ask me to read something off the cuff. And so that's, there are lots of challenges with being a pastor and having this kind of piece in your background. But what happened out of that is my mom started teaching at the state hospital school there in Farmington, where we were growing up at that time. And as she was doing that, she needed to go back and finish up. She's one of those persons who had a lot of hours but no degree, and so she was driving up, going to St. Louis U. There met a person who was studying for the priesthood, who helped her understand that what she was experiencing at home was not normal, not safe, not what should happen. And fortunately, my dad has passed on, so it's okay to kind of say that, but helped her get out of the house. I personally had to intervene between the two of them. My brother used to come in and hang out with me when they were fighting, just because I was the safe place. So having gone through that, then a couple of years later, getting my dad help, suicidal, ended up getting the diagnosis of bipolar, and the church not knowing how to deal with a family that was falling apart, because we were the standard family that sat, 3 pews back on the lectern side every Sunday, and all of a sudden, people were afraid they might catch what was going on in the family, and we became effectively unchurched. And it was one of those deals where Dad got the church in the divorce. Mom felt like the outsider and excluded and all of that, because, you don't walk out, even though she probably saved her life and saved ours. And my brother and I both have great affection for what she did, and didn't know how to deal with my dad's kind of stuff. And so it created a barrier for me with church as we were going through that time. So there was a period of time where I was the classic unchurched kind of person. It also threw us from being solidly middle class and having all of the trappings of being middle class at that time to being sort of food insecure. My job a lot of times, running paper route, doing fast food jobs, those kinds of things, a lot of times paid for some of the food that we ate, or shoes that my brother and I needed for sports and that kind of stuff, as I worked those around. And we even, my brother remembers this crazy move we made out to Wyoming with my mom. If you can imagine me driving a U-Haul truck at 16 with all of our worldly possessions.
Did they have U-Hauls back
They
then?
didn't have This was in the 1700s.
great.
They
Yeah,
didn't have
no, this
U-Hauls
is not
then.
wagons, guys. This is a U-Haul truck.
This is the Oregon Trail was based
Yeah.
on David's
That's
life.
true, yeah. That's my favorite game.
It did feel like that when we got there, because a lot of the things my mom thought were set up weren't. We actually ended up sleeping on a church floor. Some of that kind of stuff. My brother and I laugh about, we became trailer trash for a while. We lived in a mobile home park. It actually was a decent mobile home and a decent mobile home park, but it still was a very different lifestyle than what we were used to. And so some of that gives me a real heart for people who wrestle and struggle and need that little hand up, and also for people who have mental illness. The pastor side of me would love to kind of give everything away. Ended up going to college at Central Methodist. Shout out to the local Methodist school here in the state. Fell in love with the academic study of religion, even though I was there as a science person. I was this weird person. I was serving small churches, church vocation scholar, and had full ride science scholarship while playing baseball and soccer. I lettered in baseball and soccer. Didn't play either one of those in high school because high school didn't. Trivia. Anyway.
They just needed a living body at CMU.
Just
like,
just
you have a
any warm
pulse,
body.
come play
Yeah,
center field.
actually, the soccer was that way. They didn't have enough players for the team, and a bunch of us baseball guys played. Got a chance to go out to Arizona, hung out, got to be a large church youth pastor. That was so much fun, doing a large thing. Got introduced to doing something wild at annual conference. Small town kid from Missouri, and all of a sudden at annual conference, because you've got Honolulu, Hawaii, L.A., San Diego, Phoenix, Vegas, we're all in the same conference, so an annual conference. You're hearing multiple languages spoken and diversity that I'd never experienced before. And then that got one-upped when I went to seminary at Iliff in Denver. Most people don't know we have a Methodist seminary in Denver. Love downhill skiing. I joke that that's why I went there. That's really not why I went there.
It's okay. You can admit it.
This is a safe place.
Yeah. But loved the concept that they had a couple of professors who were really big in process theology, which fit my science background. But the other thing I got introduced to was a whole new world of things. One of my apartments I lived in there, I was right next to the visiting professor, and one of the professors I loved was a bishop from Bolivia, Jorge Pontelis, who, when he left there, he came to be the visiting professor because we had a chair of King Gandhi studies for peace and nonviolent protest kinds of stuff. He went back to his home country, helped organize people in the church and others for their economic development, got thrown in prison for doing that. Imagine that.
Wow.
Yeah. The other side of that, you've never lived until you had the FBI show up at your door because they're worried about the person who's the visiting professor there to study nonviolence. Kind of interesting.
All my heroes have FBI files.
Yeah.
It is a different, weird kind of world, but the biggest thing for, again, a small-town kid from rural Missouri kind of thing, to all of a sudden be introduced and have classmates who are openly gay and lesbian.
Yeah.
And really wrestling with, as they get ready to graduate, I mean, fabulous preachers, scholars, people who are just the most loving, caring. I never felt threatened or scared being around them at all. You know, there's a lot of people, I think the homophobic stuff at that time, before it was known, AIDS was just becoming a thing. And anyway,
And what's the time frame that you were in seminary?
80s.
80s, yeah.
And it was new. Folks didn't, and they were having to decide, if I go back to my Methodist conference, I have to go into the closet in order to serve, or do I try to find another group that will accept me for who I totally am?
Yeah.
And those are hard conversations when you think about you're going to go to rural Iowa, which is bleak anyway, and then have to, quote, be in the closet for the rest of your life. It just seems strange. And I didn't know this was going to be the political thing, but then I began to understand that, my whole ministry, this has been a defining question that, it just, when the discipline was changed and this became, I even got the question asked of me as I was going through the ordination process, single, are you celibate in your singleness?
Yeah.
And that question was put in there because of the other, but it still got applied all the way across. So this has been one of those, I saw and heard a lot of that, but most of my ministry life has been trying to keep churches moving and going, and you lose some of the energy that you all are bringing to the table here. Most people would not have saw me as, quote, progressive. There was a time when I was on all sides of these issues. I would get the emails from groups that were in both. I probably was more in on the feminist women pastor piece. We used to joke, the first women pastors I knew were fabulous because they had to be. They were so much above the rest of. I joke with some of my female pastor friends now. They're just as average as the rest of us because they are.
There was such a higher bar for them to clear at the beginning.
If you're the only female pastor in a conference, the whole spotlight's on you. And it'll be the same way if we ever get to a point where there's going to be ordination. The same thing will be true of the gay community as those folks come in. The first ones are going to be so far ahead of the rest of us because they have to be.
Yeah, it's almost like a backhanded compliment.
It is.
Congratulations, you have this platform now. Now go be phenomenal, or else.
Yeah.
Right, and I'm becoming aware, thanks to my kids, of things like microaggressions and all of that. And I realize what I said just implied that. And it's hard. There actually got to be a point a few years ago where I really wrestled with staying admitted. I've had lots of opportunities to take other steps out, but I've always had this calling. I know this is where I'm at. Man, it is tough with all of the things. We have to be careful that everything I say and everything I do has the potential to hurt somebody. And that is a huge burden to wear. And one of the things I dislike about the job of lead pastor is that sometimes I have to make business decisions, work about business things that don't feel very graceful and don't feel like we're honoring the theology that we want to live into. But it is the business of the church, unfortunately, that and institution is different than faith.
Yeah, and it's hard to separate that sometimes too.
Oh, it is. And we have hurt people in so many ways, both implicitly and explicitly. And it's just gotten more divided. My kids laugh and talk about, I have 2 adult kids who keep me relevant. I always think, how is the church ministering to and talking to the 20-somethings, because they are.
Yeah.
And their worldview is so different than the worldviews I grew up with. Their knowledge, the breadth, the ability they have. Is this a church they would want to come to? Is the thing that I keep asking over and over. I love the fact that you guys are reaching out to the 20-somethings here, and man, love the fact that Susan has those relationships from years of doing youth work. That is so cool. But both of my kids right now are effectively unchurched. My daughter, in part because she had a church she loved, and then it got shut down because of corporate church stuff, where they didn't handle a situation well, and microaggressions and some other stuff ended up closing down this wonderful church start that was reaching young people. But we don't always handle things well.
Yeah, and that was what was interesting. I thought, and still being in that 20-somethings bracket myself, it was interesting meeting with some of those kids and those that were younger and some that are my age, and chatting with them about like what is keeping you from coming, and just to our church as we're having this conversation, and just their response of them saying post-COVID, they just didn't know what there was, and part, I think it's for not just the 20-somethings group. We see that for a lot of generations right now currently, that they just don't know what's still around and what's available. And I think a lot of it comes back to some of these stances that churches are having to take post-2020, especially with, in the wake of George Floyd, and with, especially in the Methodist Church with General Conference, with the LGBTQ issues. It's a lot of things that we just don't know where the holes are going to be.
Well, in the way that, speaking of, we don't always know, people don't always know what's out there, but it's also that some of the language that we would like to reclaim, like language of welcoming and inclusion, has often been taken by some of these churches and used as like a bait and switch, right? So a church will say, oh, we're welcoming to everybody, but as soon as you get in there and it comes out that you're gay, then they start telling you you've done something wrong, you need to change, you need to repent. But really, so you look at all these churches and you don't know which ones are authentically saying all are welcome and which ones really have another agenda.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and my son is looking at that now. He's in a new community. Didn't grow up, doesn't know the lay of the land. It's a whole different jurisdiction. I don't know the pastors in that area, that kind of thing. And he's going, I don't want to have to go through visiting churches to find out which ones really are inclusive and which ones are not.
Right.
And that's, I get it. That is a really hard thing as we're still in this in-between time, as we're figuring this out. We were actually having this conversation as the hub group in the St. Louis area for the pastors, going, how are we going to help our congregations and the people who really want to see the church take this huge step realize that General Conference may not take that huge step.
Yeah.
You know, conservative folks may have left here, but we're still a worldwide. And if you get into having to nuance and parcel out, well, we took a step, and it's an important step, and it will get us there eventually. That's not the world we live in. The world we live in wants immediate action now.
Right.
So how do you communicate that in a way that we're moving, and how does the church take faithful steps? You got to realize, for me, this is all new ground, though, because I could not have had this open of a conversation in my last appointment. Yeah,
Tell me about
it. Appearing on a progressive pastor's podcast would have been enough to get me moved right there.
Yeah.
And I love those folks.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of great folks in that church, but it's a very divided, and as our country becomes more divided and divisive, that a lot of our churches are that way, that this is a really hard, to create safe spaces to really have the conversations about who we are, where we want to go, what we want to do, are really hard to have.
Yeah, we chatted about that in our first episode a little bit, because when we recorded, it was right after the Pope Francis announcement of blessings for same-sex couples, and we talked about how we both were feeling like super rejuvenated by that, and we're like, this is the step that is going to launch pad everything, but also at the same time, like, holy crap, it's 2023, and we're just now making this, and this is where we're at. But, I think that we chatted about this during our staff, and I think churches across the country having the same conversation of, we want to take these steps, and so we have to be, we have to be so intentional with the words that we use to say that we are these things. We have our welcome statement here at the church that we say every week for a reason, and it sounds redundant sometimes, but it's so important. You have to hammer these points home as to who we are and what we believe, and that you are able to be here and welcomed.
And I think it's so, at least I feel this tension. I'm curious if you guys do as well, because I think there's such a tension between not becoming messianic in saying that, we have to do this or else people aren't going to get the message, people aren't going to feel included. Not being messianic in a way, but also acknowledging that while churches take these small steps, like we're talking about with General Conference, the longer we take to take these steps, people are still dying, youth are still committing suicide while we take these steps, and they're important steps. And it's such a tension between acknowledging the importance of the steps, knowing that the steps are needed, if anything, from an administrative standpoint, and the fact that we're a global denomination, but also understanding there has to be some urgency behind this, because this very much is a life and death matter for a lot of people.
And you say it in life and death that way. Institutionally, it is similar, because I've already lost and gone through the pain the last couple of years of losing several great friendships as they've decided to go the conservative route and have closed doors and actually said things that were hurtful.
Yeah.
When you sue the conference and say basically those of us who stay with the conference don't believe in Jesus and aren't preaching the gospel, and I believe in the resurrection, folks. There's a reason I'm still here. I think the impossible can happen, and that's also why I'm continuing faithfully to serve there. I think there is a way through this, but at the same time, I'm also losing people on the other side who aren't willing to wait, and who have come saying, okay, this is a safe place. This is a place I feel loved and cared for. Thank you, Pastor, for showing me grace and love, but I can't be fully included.
Right.
And, if somebody's feeling a call to ministry, it's like that door is still not open.
Yeah.
Technically, I still can't do their wedding.
Yeah.
I've got to be careful what I say on this, because it could be a chargeable offense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I know some of our churches in the St. Louis area are breaking those rules.
Yeah.
And more power to them. I am not called to do that at this point. That's just, I leave it where I'm at. That's I'm a rule follower on that one.
Well, and there's a tension to that too, like when I think I had shared this with you guys. I was in El Salvador a couple weeks ago and talking to some of our friends down there who are Maryknoll missionaries, Catholic missionaries, and they were talking about the current state of El Salvador and the current political landscape and stuff like that. And they had kind of said, we would love to speak out against some of this injustice, but if we do, our visas will get revoked. This food program we're running will shut down, and then people are going to die from hunger. But if we stay quiet and stay, under the surface, then we can keep running this food program and people will keep getting food. And so for them, I feel that similar tension here is that even if you're not one of the ones speaking out and breaking the rules and doing that kind of stuff, there's other great work that still has to be done. It can't all be that. And it can't all be the day-to-day grind of ministry. There's got to be a balance of those things.
Speaking of which, I'm actually kind of excited that you've picked up and run with one of the things that the CREA project, where we kind of looked around and went, this is crazy the way in which we are doing our missions and our outreach. And from my experience, people who have needs have really big needs.
Yeah.
And giving a $20 gas card wasn't going to solve our issue about housing insecurity when we moved to Wyoming. And so the idea that we're going to take these resources and really walk alongside folks and not try to be the savior and come in over the top, but to partner with and to help people discover their own gifts and the other resources out there, it's just been a lifelong passion and something that I, from my own experience, say, hey, there's a better way to do this. So I'm grateful.
We have been doing this podcast for 3 episodes, but David just took that transition like a pro.
That was a professional
I am gagged right now. Oh, man. But
I've done this a little longer than you guys have. They haven't called it a podcast.
Obviously. It's I can tell.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah, well, and that's kind of what we wanted to chat
Considering that
about.
my daughter is older than you, yes.
Older than you, but younger than me. Right in the sweet spot.
Right
in the
right.
sweet spot. There you
go. No, that's part of what we wanted to chat about, too, with some of these missions things that we have coming up. So since David kind of gave us the little teaser right there,
we go.
And we've talked about it for a couple episodes, JT, why don't you kind of give us a little nugget of what TCP is?
A sprinkling,
Ooh,
shall
that's a good way
I?
to put it. Yeah.
So the CREA project is a new social and community aid project here at Concord Trinity. In the past, when somebody would come to us with a need, whether for cash assistance or something else, there was an application process. We could give them a certain amount of money. They could come back every 6 months and reapply. But it did nothing to address underlying systemic issues of need in their lives. And so the CREA project, the word CREA is the Greek word for need. That we find in the book of Acts, where it talks about the believers assisting people as any had need. And so this program is meant for when somebody comes to us asking for assistance. They may be asking for help with utilities or help with groceries or something. We will work with them over a long term, a long process and a deep process of addressing both surface level needs as well as underlying needs, things that maybe they don't think of as a presenting need in this very moment, but is something of a root that's perpetuating the cycles of poverty or what it may be. And so we're really excited about this project, and we had a lot of conversation through its formation last year about this idea that charity and justice are 2 different things. Mm-hmm. And I think they're often very much conflated in the church. We feel like we're doing justice by giving some money to somebody or giving a gas card to somebody.
But that makes us feel good.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I mean, we are really good at giving stuff away.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
But we're not really dealing with the need and not helping people truly transform their life. And honestly, that's what keeps me in ministry, is when I see life change, when I see people really. In our last church, we had a couple come to us, 2 kids. They obviously had already kicked the drug habit, but were really wrestling and struggling with what they were going to do. And our church came alongside them, and it was more than just, hey, we could have given them groceries, and I did. I can remember the secretary looking at me when I walked out, said, hey, I'm taking them to the grocery store. And she's like, call me. Please keep in touch. She was really worried. It's like, no, about once every year, I had this family that would come, and I'm like, this is the one. And, man, we invested deep. We had people come alongside. They got her back in school. She's now a certified social worker.
Wow.
Helping
There you go.
Love
alleviate
that.
these problems. They live in a home. We helped them get a car because transportation was a huge issue. I mean, really cheap car, but we got the car.
Yeah, still.
And their daughter is now driving that car. Who's turned 16. It's one of those, but it happened because an entire community came alongside, and they not only got help, but they became a part. And then what was beautiful is she became my bull detector. When somebody would come in and somebody would start asking questions, it was like, no. they're just one the hand out. They don't want to change. She could tell.
Yeah.
I mean,
We kind of had to do that at my last church too, just where we were at locationally. We were,
absolutely.
just a mile from the airport, so we had a lot of people coming in from bus rides and all over across. And you can it's very easy to spot after you get a few of those, the non-committal ones, to see who's going to be serious about change and who's not. Which is sad. I don't want to have to be in that position as a church. I want to be able to care and love for anyone, but if you know that people aren't going to end up taking the help that you're going to present, it makes it a much tougher challenge to overcome, for sure.
Yeah, and that's, at least I think that's, we talk about this work, and there's something of a risk associated with this work, just by virtue of the fact that you're investing deeply in people. One, people in general, but two, I know at least the churches that I've worked with and been a part of, there are some seemingly inherent untrustworthiness of people outside of our walls who aren't worshiping with us every Sunday, and people, some of the people that I've worked with, over the course of my ministry, have had that view of, we don't know you, you don't look like us, you don't dress the way that we, and so they come to us for help. We'll say, we'll give you a handout, we'll give you some cash or whatever. And the hope is that they'll move on and they'll never come back. We're not actually willing to partner with them in any way or accompany them in any kind of long-term transition. And so this project at Concord is hoping to break that down and move in a much more healthy direction.
Yeah, and I think that's what gets me excited about our missions too, kind of how we're viewing these trips that we're going on and trying to get rid of that messianic mentality and white saviorism that I think the American church has taken across borders, for sure. So looking at what is the reasoning for why we're taking these trips? Is it for us to actually go and work alongside other missions and different churches, or is it just for us to get a stamp on the passport? And I think we have to be able to weed out what people's intentions are in things like that. But that's more your speed, and so if you want to hit on that.
Well, I want to toss it over to White Noise. I'm curious, as someone who has a few more laps around the neighborhood than the rest of us.
Crazy.
Been on a few
I've
more
only
of these.
been in this neighborhood 6 months.
Well, this
so there you go,
neighborhood.
We're talking about the neighborhood of Earth.
We're talking the Earth, the global neighborhood, the lifespan neighborhood. I'm curious. You've told us lots of stories about trips you've been on, youth missions you've been on and stuff. When you think about missions, especially things like international missions, we as white North Americans going to other countries to do work, what is that? What is the value in that? What is the purpose of that? How has that changed for you over the years?
I would wholeheartedly say I'm one of those who's had to repent of the sort of mission tourist kind of model that was probably a lot of what we did in building youth missions back in the day, because it was about going to places that were not like it. I will say the one thing that we always built in, and that I love when you start talking about the change, realizing we didn't do as much for the people there, But what I loved, particularly doing the youth mission, was to get, and in both cases where I built large youth groups, it was upper middle class kids
Yeah.
out of their upper middle class cocoon and into situations where they were seeing kids who lived very differently, families who lived very differently, and beginning to have to see a different part of the world that they're, quite frankly, in many cases, I had parents that were scared that something might happen to their kid or those kinds of things, and would try to keep them from seeing those kinds of things, versus beginning to understand, hey, there's a whole different world and worldview. And then the challenge in a lot of those cases for seeing, particularly where we, Mozambique is a great example of this with our covenant relationship there. People who live a whole different style of life but love to get together and worship, and there's a joy and a passion about their worship that is just so different than, our come sit on our hands for an hour and hope it doesn't go too long kind of worship. And so
the football game's on. We got to get the service over.
Get out of here. The person who's standing up pointing at their watch because we've got to beat the Baptist to lunch.
Exactly.
And so that I love that part of it that gets us out of our comfort zone or normal. Tell a story on my partner, Nancy, wonderful person who has grown a ton over the years. But I mean, she grew up in the San Luis area. This is like coming home for her. But when we got married, she didn't know that high schools didn't have indoor pools.
Oh.
She thought all high schools had indoor pools. I mean, that was just what she grew up in, the Parkway Pool School District, where her parents were teachers, and that was just.
Every school serves caviar at lunch.
Obviously,
well, caviar, no, not exactly. I
don't know. That square pizza could be caviar equivalent.
Well,
that's the
true.
best.
We don't realize sometimes how locked in we are to what we've always known.
Yeah.
And so I think there is huge benefit in getting outside of that and seeing a different. I love what you guys are going to do for the initial. Here in the San Luis area, just getting us out of our own neighborhood and into a different part of town.
Yeah, I think that was a mentality that I had to break when I was a student too. Is you check off these mission trips as like I'm either going to go halfway across the country or halfway across the world, and that's the only limitations that you have. And there's so much that I can do just down the street here. When that switch finally clicks for a student, especially working in student ministry, I love seeing that change happen. And that's kind of what you were hinting at too, from your perspective when you were doing that with your church too.
Well, and that's what last year when we were planning our missions for this year, we had talked about doing something international, and because that's something that this church hadn't done since pre-COVID, so it's been several years, and I had put up kind of some check boxes on the whiteboard and said, I will do international missions as long as we meet this criteria. And one of them was that it's not at the expense of local missions, that we're not ignoring our own community, our own neighborhood, just to fund a trip that goes across the world or across the country. And so this year we've done this to the End of the Earth theme of we're doing something in St. Louis, we're doing something in Washington, D.C., and then we are going to El Salvador in October. And as I kind of wrestled with this, I kept going back to this thing that one of my professors had said to me one time about missions as the act of going to another place and seeing what God is up to in that place, right? Seeing what God is doing there and asking permission to lend your hands and feet to the work that's happening, not going in and, demanding that, you be allowed to take part or saying that we want to do this, but seeing what's going on and asking if we can join in that work. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're kind of running a little low on time. So David, one thing that we're going to pose to all of our guests as they come on to the podcast was a question that we posed to each other on our first episode. but this idea of ministry, and you've been in the game for quite a while now.
200 years.
Just about. I think that's what we rounded up to.
I really don't want to say how long I've been in ministry. It will feed you guys in ways that is not.
Yeah. So in the 900 years that you've been in ministry, ministry is tough, and there's a lot that goes into it, and you've been around it in a lot of these big cultural shifts as well. Today with LGBTQ and with racial rights and women in ministry, and you've kind of
dark ages.
You've gotten to go through the gambit of it. So through all of this, what is it that keeps you coming back to ministry?
I think what has always kept me energized in ministry is the hope of change. Change in people's lives when you see somebody get it. I had a professor in college who said he taught because of the light bulbs, when you see the light bulb go off. But, like the story I had of the family where we saw real change in their life, and it has changed their life and their kids' life, and it will change their grandkids' life. But also the hope that we as an institution can change and live into being the place of healing that Jesus called us to be. I still have an evangelical heart as well, to see people find hope and healing for the real wounds that hurt them. There are a whole lot of people who wrestle with a whole lot of hidden stuff inside of them, and I believe in doctors and nurses and counselors and all of that, but I also think there is this huge need in the culture today for community and for hope. And I think we as a church are uniquely positioned in the Jesus message to be able to provide the community that surrounds and prays for and loves. And most of us here were nurtured by a community. We didn't do this on our own.
Mm-hmm.
And that hope, been through a lot in my life, and there was always hope that keeps moving us forward, that what the world says is an end, God says, hey, there is a way, and there is hope.
That's awesome.
That'll preach.
That's going to work. I think
That's going to work. We'll just post this on Sunday.
We can all kick our feet up during service. That'll be great. Yeah. Man, well, thank you, David, so much for being the inaugural guest on the Progressive
honored.
Pastor Podcast.
Deeply
honored. The studio audience is losing their mind right now. Thanks so much. And thanks again for listening. Make sure that you are following us on our social media. We're posting updates on there. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and X, because Elon is ridiculous and changed the name. But make sure you're following us on there. We have updates on new episodes and all kinds of fun stuff there. But thanks again for joining us this week, and we will see you guys next time.
See you guys.